This is the Aesthetic Ecosystems Podcast. I'm Ben Hale, your virtual design guide to help you and your family have a healthy, beautiful landscape with less work. What's up, and welcome to episode 8 of the Aesthetic Ecosystems Podcast. That's right, guys. We're creeping up on double digits here with the podcast. I'm so glad you're here today to tune in for another show. If you haven't listened to the previous shows, of course, I highly recommend you go check them out. I mean, what's not to miss, right? So today we're going to be talking about disease and pest problems, and more importantly, what they mean. What's the underlying cause for these issues? And that's really the key that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be going deep, getting our Inspector Gadget hat on today and really trying to understand what are the causes or the root causes of your issues that you're having with your plants in your landscape. And this is everything from your trees to the grass beneath your feet to the plants in your garden bed, and even as much to say as about your vegetable garden if you have a vegetable garden. This same process applies there too. So definitely stick around today. It's going to be a great show. And before that, I just want to thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. I'm really having a great time recording these first 8 episodes here, and I hope you really feel like they're jam-packed full of information that's helpful for you in changing your life through your landscape. And I want to hear your feedback. So definitely, if you have any comments, go on over to the show notes. Today's episode, you can go to aestheticecosystems.com/episode 8, and you will get the page for this episode and leave your comments there. And in any show in the future, the same thing. You go to aestheticecosystems.com/episode followed by the number of the episode, and that'll take you right to the episode that you're listening to. And leave a comment. I keep a close watch on those comments to see what's coming in and to hear your feedback. And I want to hear your feedback. I want to get this show custom tailored to fit what you want to hear. And I'd love to talk about the topics that you're dealing with right now in your landscape. If you're listening to this as I'm recording it or soon after, it's still late winter, and so there's not a whole lot going on in the landscape. This is the perfect time to be planning for your growth season, the upcoming year. If you're from the south, your plants might already be booming, or they might not even slow down over the colder months here, especially if you're in, say, southern Florida or something, and or throughout the world. So definitely leave your comments. I'd love to hear your feedback. Let me know what you want to hear. Let me know what you're thinking about the show so far. And I want to have an open ear to what you're thinking. And likewise, your reviews on iTunes and Stitcher and other feeds are really helpful for me reaching other people and helping get our message across. So if you haven't done so already, go on over to iTunes or whatever and leave a thoughtful review. Let us know, let everybody know what you think about this show and how you feel about it so far. So let's get into it today. Disease and pest problems and what they mean. That's the most important piece, is what they really mean. There's tons of ways to fix disease problems already out there. I'm sure you're aware of. If you have grubs, there's a way to fix that, right? And there's a thing you can go get, grub removers for your landscape. If you're having aphids, you can go get a spray for that. And there's all sorts of custom tailored tools that there's a ton of research that goes into these things and to how to eradicate them from your landscape. There's also organic methods. If you're into more of the healthy methods of removing things, or organic doesn't always mean healthy. I want to just make that clear. But if you're trying to do something that maybe is either healthier for you and your family, generally speaking, organic is the way to go. And there are plenty of ways to solve some of these problems there too. But the key here is that if you just work on the specific problem at hand, you might not be fixing the true problem. And that's what we're going to get into today. So when you're talking about different types of plant disease or conditions, problems, generally speaking, they fall into these categories. They're mold problems, bacteria problems. So your microorganisms, protozoa also fit into that category. Sometimes you have like a worm problem, nematodes, or something similar. They might be an insect or crustacean problem. So it might be certain microcrustaceans. It's crazy what the vast array of organisms, when you start to get to the microscopic level, even just the amount of diversity there is mind-blowing. So anyway, I'm fascinated with microbiology. Here's a fun fact for you guys. I have a degree in microbiology. So it's a perfect segue into this landscape area of healthy landscapes, because healthy soil is full of life, and unhealthy soil generally is not full of life, and that totally builds into plant health. So healthy plants usually need healthy soil, and to have healthy soil, you need a healthy array of microorganisms, and that's right up my alley. So anyway, enough about me. Getting back on track here. So again, we have different causes of these diseases. So you have mold, bacteria, protozoa, insects. You may even have diseased plants that are just, because they're not in such a healthy condition, they're more prone to pressure from browsing animals and such as well. But that's not always the case. Sometimes browsing animals just look for the most nutritious plants in the landscape as well. But in general, you're talking about these little guys, these little organisms that sometimes get out of whack and cause problems. And the one thing I'm going to make abundantly clear here that's not generally talked about is you have more good organisms than you have bad organisms. So this is all about balance. And when this gets out of balance is when you start to have a disease issue. So if you can keep a good balance of the healthy organisms in your landscape, then you're going to have fewer problems of this sort. And we could talk for hours and upon hours and still not cover this full subject of how to have a healthy balance of organisms. And the truth is that this is a relatively new era, and there's not a whole lot that's known about it, of how to support this healthy ecosystem and keep it in balance, and how to monitor it well without just waiting until disease issues arrive. But the point I want to make here is that some of these quick solutions, they disturb the healthy balance or the healthy beneficial organisms as well. And so while you might be treating the specific problem, you might be hurting things long term more so than you think by killing other organisms that help recreate a balance. A kind of a similar example to this is, I gave the example a while back of aphids in a previous episode, where if you have an aphid problem and you spray, you might also be killing the predators of the aphids at the same time. So you're going to have the aphids bounce back. Inevitably, there's going to be a few that survive, or some eggs somewhere that hatch out, or there's going to be aphids coming in from off-site from another location, maybe your neighbor's landscape, and they're going to continue to cause that same problem. And so you have to continue to treat for it. And unfortunately, treating for a lot of these organisms, they're not very well targeted, and you're going to have issues of your predator insects that might prey on the aphids, such as lacewings and ladybugs. Those are very, very important insects to have in your landscape because they keep and maintain a healthy balance. And they grow slower, they reproduce more slowly, and so unfortunately you disrupt the whole life cycle of your predators, and your prey insects, the problem insects, will be the ones that continue to come back. The example I was going to give from a medical standpoint too is antibiotics. So we've used antibiotics pretty profusely over the past, say, 100 years. And in that time, we've now started to discover that by taking especially oral antibiotics that go throughout your whole body and your whole bloodstream, that they disrupt normal cycles, and there's infections that occur only after antibiotic treatment usually that can be very severe just because you took care of one problem and it causes another. Okay, now diseases in general, the point I want to make here is that they're indicators of deeper issues. They're usually an indicator of plant stress. And the key for this episode is to figure out what is the root cause of the plant stress. What's the underlying issue of the plant stress? And if we figure that out and make the plant comfortable and happy, most likely the disease condition will go away. An example here is, say you have a mole problem. That's pretty common. My neighbor has a mole problem right now, and I was chatting with him about it. And most often what people do is they try to trap the mole, kill the moles, or use chemicals even to kill the moles or drive them away from their landscape. And especially if you're using the chemicals, these definitely have a more widespread effect than just killing moles specifically. So it's just something to exercise caution with. And yes, they can take care of the mole problem, but most likely the moles are going to come back because you haven't taken care of the root cause. A lot of times moles come around because there's grubs in your landscape. And so people hate the grubs, right? They eat the roots of your grass or whatever, and they want to get rid of them. And rightfully so. They can cause a lot of problems. But usually the reason that you have excess grubs in your landscape is when you have weakened grass plants, and especially with excess root zone death. So if your grass plants are stressed to the point where the roots aren't surviving in a healthy manner, a lot of times this is due to excess fertilizer use, where there's a burst of growth, the grass blades are being cut real short, the roots are stressed because they can't support the growth, and then the excess chopping of the grass blades, and so the grass blade plant goes into a stress mode, and that's when they attract things like the excess grubs in your landscape. So by taking care of the health of your grass in a more holistic manner, you make the grass plants more robust. They become less appealing and less accessible to the grubs, which then the moles leave and go somewhere else because there's fewer grubs. It's a more long-term solution, but it gives you the right solution in the long run as well. You have to spend less money and less time treating your lawn to remove the grubs and the moles. So that's an example of how we kind of investigate and diagnose some of these really underlying problems and what really is the cause, as opposed to maybe the surface thing of oh, it's just I have moles in my landscape. So when it comes to plant issues, 90% of the time, I might say, don't quote me on that statistic, because 98% of statistics are not statistically relevant, or some joke like that, right? I would say 90% of the time, if you fix your soil health, you're going to fix the plant health issue, because trying to maintain a good, fertile, healthy soil will inevitably build your soil life, which makes your plant happier, makes it stronger, and a lot of times takes care of the issue, even if it's a non-specific adjustment you're making to your soil and fertility. So just something to think about there. If you say you have to turn off this episode right now and you have to run out in your landscape and fix a plant problem, and you can't come back to the episode anymore and can't listen to anything else, the key takeaway I'll give you is fix your soil health. Okay, so let's put on our investigator hat and try and get into some of these clues that might lead us to where the problem is coming from. So first, we're going to need to do a little bit of research. And this research will help us understand more about your plant that you're having a problem with, more about your landscape and the specific site your plant is located, and then just some of the conditions in general. So first, what are the preferred plant growth conditions in an ideal situation for your plant? You can usually find this stuff with a quick Google search, and if you just type the plant, whatever plant you have, type in its common name, you'll find the scientific name. Use the scientific name to look for more details on its growth conditions. So let's say it's an oak tree, right? Maybe you have a white oak. So you search white oak, and most likely you'll get a Wikipedia result. You might get some other results as well, and that'll tell you the scientific name. So for white oak, it's Quercus alba. And so then you copy that name, type it into your search bar again, Quercus alba growing conditions, or something like that. You might not even need to type that. You might just type the species name, genus and species, the scientific name, and you'll come up with a bunch of resources for, one, where to buy these plants, but more importantly, some resources that tell you the growing conditions. One resource that I really enjoy, especially for those people that live in the eastern and midwestern U.S. Throughout the Great Plains states, is the Missouri Botanical Garden website. They have a huge database of plants and the preferred growing conditions for these plants. So it goes through, it tells you all sorts of things that the plant likes, what types of soil they grow in, what type of light it prefers, what type of moisture conditions, and all sorts of things like that are very helpful and things you need to know before moving forward. So once you get these preferred plant conditions, now it's time to look at your landscape, at the site where your plant is planted, as well as just your general living area. So for your general living area, find out your USDA hardiness zone. So this will tell you basically how cold your landscape gets 90% of the time in the winter. And so what's the lowest temperature that you get in your climate? This is helpful because if the plant is unable to survive that condition or it becomes stressed through that condition, that can be a major problem. What are your existing soil conditions? This is where you need to get into your specific location of your plant. So what's your soil type? If you haven't had a soil test done, this is a very important time to do it. It might lead you to an answer. So what's your soil type? What's the fertility level of your soil? What's the pH of your soil? How compacted is your soil? And what's the depth of your topsoil? So how far down until you hit your subsoil, which is like your clay or your sand or what have you. Beyond the soil piece, what's your water availability? So what's the frequency of watering, if you're irrigating it for one, or what's the rainfall frequency? What's the quantity of water you get throughout the year and throughout certain seasons if you see stress during a certain time of year? And what's the drainage of the specific site that you're talking about? So does the site drain well? Does water pool up there? How often does this happen? Either way. Do you have erosion there that's occurring? So these are very important things to consider. What's the sun exposure? How much sun does it get? What time of year? And is sun reflecting off of something? If it's, by the wall of your house and you have strong afternoon sun hitting the wall of your house and the plant's right next to it, that could be causing plant stress if the plant's not adapted to that condition. Or alternatively, maybe it's in a shady spot during a certain time of year that it can't have too much shade. What about planting depth? Especially for shrubs and trees, it's very important that when transplanted into your landscape, that the plant isn't placed too deeply in the landscape where there's soil touching part of the area that should be the trunk. This can cause some major issues. Let's see, what's next? Okay, the space for root expansion. So how much space do the roots have to grow? This is depth as well as width. Are they being crowded by something? Maybe it's a physical structure like concrete, or maybe it's some bedrock, or you could be talking about other plants that might be crowding the roots as well. So it's something to consider there. And wind exposure. How much wind is the plant receiving? Is it excessive amounts of wind, or maybe that could cause excessive evaporation or heat stress or cold stress in the winter? Okay, so those are a lot of things to consider, but those are all very important things to diagnose the issues. So before we move on to using some of this stuff, also look around. Is the plant growing next to something that's allelopathic? And what I mean by this is a term that means, is it growing next to a plant that secretes chemicals in the soil that prevent its ability to thrive? So I have two examples of this actually in our landscape where this is certainly occurring. One is we have a type of sunflower that we have planted in our backyard toward the back. I kind of put it in this, the corner where it can just proliferate and grow profusely was my hope, and kind of fill the space and provide some really fun late summer beauty. Well, it turns out that I planted this it's a type of sunflower called a Jerusalem artichoke or a sunchoke, and I I planted them right underneath these hackberry trees. Well, it turns out that these plants do not thrive under the hackberry trees because the leaves of the hackberry tree, when they drop in the fall, they secrete tannins, so kind of an acidic type of chemical, into the soil. And over years, they will actually adjust the soil to where there's certain secretions in the soil itself, not just the tannins, but other chemicals as well. I can't remember specifically what the chemical is from hackberries, but it prevents certain plants from being able to grow, and certainly these sunflowers. So they've actually really struggled to take off and thrive like they're supposed to. Another example is grass, actually. So a lot of trees struggle when they're planted right in the middle of a bunch of grass because grass secretes chemicals that prevent the ability of certain trees to grow, and it's a way for grassland prairies to maintain its prairie-like space. So some examples of these allelopathic plants. So I already mentioned hackberries, grass. Also common ones are walnuts or something in the walnut family like butternut trees, and oaks as well can even have allelopathic properties. Even maple trees can secrete chemicals. So it's just something to consider. What are the plants growing around your specific problem plant? And again, use Google as your friend, your investigator tool, to search if those plants, so type in your plant as well as some of the plants around it one by one, and see if they're incompatible. Okay, next, what is your current chemical use? So are you using any chemicals on your site that may affect your plant? The most common problem here is when people spray their yard for a broadleaf treatment, a weed and feed treatment on their lawn, and they'll spray it right above the root zone of trees. And a lot of these weed and feed treatments, they kill any plant that is not a blade type plant like grass. And so any broadleaf plant like clover or like dandelion will be killed by this chemical. And likewise, your trees. So your trees are considered a broadleaf plant as well, or your shrubs. And so if you're getting this chemical to where it seeps into the roots of your tree, it will cause disease problems and stress problems in your tree, and you might even kill it. This is very common. I see it especially in commercial landscapes as well, where I see the area that should be a kind of a mulch circle, it gets weeds, and so landscape maintenance people will spray that area for weeds, and it kills the tree. And so if you're using chemicals improperly where they'll affect the plant that's having problems, that if you stop the use of that chemical soon enough, you might get a healthier plant. All right, we've got tons of information now. We've got information about what makes our plant happy, what's its ideal situation. We've got information about your specific space, and we've asked a lot of questions about the habits and practices that you've made in your landscape that might positively or negatively affect your plants. So what can we do with all this information? Let's ask a few questions here that might help drill down into what the specific issues are. The first and most obvious thing to do is you've got all these existing conditions of your specific garden location, and you've got the desired conditions of your plant. Check and see if there's a mismatch. If you're planting a plant that doesn't grow in the right pH, I've used this example in previous episodes as well. We have blueberry plants. They prefer pretty acidic conditions. I planted them in our front garden, which is basic by nature. So the bedrock is limestone. It provides a fairly basic clay subsoil, and usually the topsoil is basic as well. We planted it in a space where there were previously some evergreen bushes, and evergreens tend to acidify soil. So I assumed, without doing any soil testing, that the blueberries would thrive there. Well, as it turns out, they're really struggling because, unfortunately, the subsoil in our area is so dominantly basic that it quickly over influence the acidic nature of the previous evergreen plants. So if there's an incompatibility like that the plant just cannot adapt to, that could be your issue. That could be what's weakening your plant or causing it to have stress with growth, and that can be very important. Similarly, if your plant doesn't do well in compacted soil conditions, and it requires loose soil, that could be an indicator as well. A lot of developed areas, like your subdivisions, as they're constructed, the soil becomes very compacted and low in nutrients. And so this is a very common condition with landscape plants. Okay, so do that exercise, check if there's a mismatch between desired and existing conditions, and then ask yourself, can this issue be easily corrected? Sometimes it can, and if it can't, you're in luck. It might require ongoing maintenance to correct, but if you really want to save this plant or you really like this plant for a certain reason, it might be worth the effort, even though it might cause extra work. So if that's the case, you're in luck. Or maybe it's an issue you can correct without having to provide long-term maintenance, which is even more ideal. The next, can you fix the soil health in life? Sometimes by just building the soil, and like I said earlier in the episode, a lot of times, if you just fix the soil health, then you'll end up with better plant health for most plants. And so you can do this through composting, adding compost. You don't want to add too much, and you don't want to add it in depth. You want to add it as a top dressing to your garden beds. Usually small layers at a time, so a quarter to a half inch at a time. If you want to do more, I would suggest mixing it with topsoil so you're not overly concentrating the area with sometimes some pretty strong conditions. And you might also end up with a lot of leaching if you add too much. So compost, mulching as well is very important. It provides a more natural basis to your garden beds if you're using the right mulches. So you're allowing ongoing decomposition, some nurturing active soil life. You're insulating your soil. So mulch is very important. And there's certain nutrients or additions you can add as well, especially if you get a soil test and they come back with some recommendations. But again, if you're talking about NPK levels or whatever, just be careful with using synthesized ones because they're highly concentrated. They leach out quickly, and they usually cause too much of a boost at once, and then it's lost, and it causes kind of a dependency in its own problems as well. So if you're looking at nutrients, consider more natural options, maybe where things are naturally available in lower doses that release over time. You can also consider more kind of concentrated amendments that are liquid form. So two that come to mind that they aren't readily available always, but you can check for them or make them yourself. The first is Garrett juice. So this is a product that's promoted by Howard Garrett of the Dirt Doctor show down in Texas. And he actually provides a pretty good amendment that is really good at boosting soil life. So you can check, if you just search for Garrett juice, you'll find it. It's Garrett, I believe is how you spell his last name. And if you search for that, he sells it, as well as he gives away the recipe freely if you want to make it yourself. Similarly, compost tea. So if you can find a good, healthy compost tea, these aren't generally very shelf stable because it's a product that's teeming with beneficial organisms for your soil, but it can be used as a foliar spray or as a soil spray and really change things around quickly. So something to consider. They're more of a organic gardening type product, but they're very helpful in the boosting your soil health. So something to consider if that's what you want to do. Other types of amendments you can consider are green sand. So this is a type of clay that's mined from old marine ocean sediment, and so it's full of a lot of different minerals, a lot of trace minerals. It also is good at absorbing water and retaining it in your soil, and it also is a slow release of I believe it's potassium. So it's a good amendment. Don't use any of these amendments without first knowing what you're doing with them. So I recommend you research each of these. Kelp, as well as used as a good amendment to boost some of the organic matter that's available in your soil. You can also use molasses as kind of a sugar boost to some of the organisms there if you have a little bit present already. I usually suggest that in combination with some of these other amendments. And also, becoming a lot more popular is mycorrhizal fungi. So inoculating your soil with these fungi that are able to grow in tandem with plants to help boost the plant health as well as the fungal health with good healthy fungi. So these are just some examples of amendments. We'll get into a lot more into amendments in the future with more in-depth shows about it and what each type of amendment can do and when a certain one's important and when one's not. But again, overall here I recommend they're used more as a nurturing thing to a tool to build the health of your landscape so you don't have to maintain it and keep adding stuff in the future. So that's kind of what that's what the goal of these things should be. So they're not just something to kind of use lackadaisically or willy-nilly or whatever the term you want to use is. They're used for a specific purpose, and so I suggest you research what they do before just going out and using them. Okay, so we've talked about how we can fix our soil health. Sometimes, unfortunately, there's just a complete mismatch between the desired plant conditions and the existing conditions of your location. And if that's the case, there are a couple things you can do here. One is you can choose to accept the diseased condition as is. If you really want this plant, you want to save it for some reason, and you don't want to wait for a new plant to take its place, you may just have to either accept the condition or replace it with something. You can choose to replace it. Or another option is to find out what you can do to fix the plant condition without solving the underlying problem. And this often requires continued treatment. So if you really want the plant and you may just need to continually treat it to solve the outward problem without fixing what the core issue is. So if you do want to replace the plant, you decide to go with that process, that corrective action, which unfortunately sometimes you have to do. If it's an incompatible plant like the sunflowers in our backyard, either the sunflowers or the hackberry trees have to go. And most likely it'll be the sunflowers because the hackberry trees are 30 years old and I don't want to remove a mature tree just for some sunflowers. Likewise, the blueberries, they'll probably have to get moved because they're not going to thrive in that location unless I continue to amend the soil every couple seasons. So when you're looking for a replacement plant, think about what plant can meet the aesthetic desire and fit the space conditions. And again, you kind of go through the same investigative process. So what are my current conditions? And then you work backward to see what plants are able to grow in that condition. And that's the fun piece where you start to really get to look at some different options and make a great choice to fit your new landscape space. So that's it for today, guys. We're done with our investigation. I hope this is giving you some direction on what to do with your plants that are having problems in your landscape. And I really hope it moves your landscape into a positive direction where you can have the beauty that you want without taking tons of time to maintain your landscape. And that's what it's all about here, guys. And the way we do that is through plant health and keeping you healthy at the same time. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you're not really sure where to start, if this may sound overwhelming or you just want to get moving now, I have two things for you. First, to make a change right now in saving time without any expense on your part, I suggest you go over to aestheticecosystems.com/27 hours. That's 27 hours. And check out the resource I have there. There's a free guide I have on how to save 27 hours just through simple habit changes in your landscape. It'll give you back a ton of time this season, and I hope you can use that time to make a positive difference in your life. And if you want to go deeper, if you need some help with what you're working on, head on over to aestheticecosystems.com/consulting and look at the options there I have available for direct one-on-one consulting through virtual consultation. And I can help you with your issues you might be having, or I can help you with setting goals for your landscape and how to save time. And we can work more deeply on how to do that. Okay, now it's time to talk about the launch party, guys. Excuse me, not party, but partay. The launch partay is for the first 2 months of the show, from March 11th through May 11th, 2018. I want to have some fun to help spread the word about the show. I really appreciate your enthusiasm and interest in this show, and I want to get you guys involved and have some fun while we're doing it. So this is a chance to have some fun, for us to get connected, to win some prizes. And let's talk about the prizes before we talk about what we're doing. So what are the prizes? Weekly, I'm offering a free consultation with me, Ben Hale, which is normally a $99 value. So one person each week that gets involved in the launch partay gets a free consultation. I'm also giving away a free offer for one of my ebooks, 10 Ways to Get More Beauty with Less Work, which is a $19 value. Next, the grand prize. There is only one of these we're giving away through this whole launch party. So at the end of the launch partay, the Organic Lawn Care Manual by Paul Tukey. So Paul Tukey himself has offered to give away one free book to a lucky winner that's getting involved in this launch party. And this book is all about how to manage a healthy lawn, from anything from a golf course style lawn to your low maintenance lawn, which of course is something I prefer here on this show, right? I own this book. I've read this book multiple times. I've given it away. It's a kind of a tattered and worn version that I have. I use some of these practices in my own lawn. So I love this book, and I highly promote it as well, and you'll hear me talk about it throughout the show. But Paul Tukey has been kind enough to offer a copy of his book as a grand prize, and there's also a special surprise for everybody that's going to be getting involved in the launch partay. The Rolling River Nursery out of California has offered a special surprise for everybody that's involved. The Rolling River Nursery is a USDA certified organic nursery. So I went online and I looked around for nurseries that have online availability, shipped through the continental US, and have some great offerings. And Rolling River Nursery has been kind enough to become involved with our launch party. And they're not only are they online availability, but they also are certified organic, which means they don't use any harmful herbicides or pesticides that you have to be concerned with your family about. And so what you're getting is a safe and healthy plant. They also offer a ton of edible plants and trees and shrubs, cacti and succulents. So they offer several trees and shrubs that are adaptable throughout most of the United States. So definitely worth checking them out. And in addition, these guys are also involved with a nonprofit in Southern California to help local food movements called plantingjustice.org. So if you want to learn more about them, you can go to rollingrivernursery.com. And I also want to give a shout out to Paul Tukey's website for his Organic Lawn Care Manual, and his other works is paultukey.com, PaulTukey. And to sum up, guys, okay, you want to learn how to get involved with this launch party? Go over to aestheticecosystems.com/pod launch, and that's PODLAUNCH. There's a link in the show notes, and that's going to give you all the instructions on how to get involved. There's two ways specifically to get involved. One is through sharing with your peeps on Facebook, and the other is through leaving a review on iTunes. Both of these are going to help spread the word about the show and get other friends listening to it as well. And I sure appreciate your help here. And likewise, this is going to be a fun time. So go on over and to aestheticecosystems.com/pod launch to get involved. Check out the show notes for any links I mentioned today. We talked about saving 27 hours in your landscape, and I'll try and leave a link there as well to Missouri Botanical Garden that I mentioned earlier. And before you head out, I want you to head on over to your app that you're listening on, or your computer or whatever, and subscribe. Subscribing will make sure you get the future episodes delivered right to you and ready to go, so you can listen to them on a timely basis. And make sure you go over to iTunes or Stitcher or your favorite listening app and leave a review, and so we can get to reach more people through this podcast and make a positive difference in everybody's lives that's listening. before you go, I just want to say thanks for tuning in, and make sure you live with passion and make tomorrow better than today.